I think in this day and age, if we don't hear kids say from time to time, you're the strictest parent, or you're the only parent who does this, we're probably not doing our job. And so I want parents to even see that as encouragement. And I would meet kids in that space of saying, you know what? My guess is you do have a lot of friends around you whose parents don't set limits in this way. And they're responsible for their kids, and I'm responsible for mine. And I'm okay with the fact that that seems unfair. We talk so much about how boundaries create security for kids. They help them feel safe. And so I want them to experience the safety of boundaries even when it frustrates them.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Paula Faris Show. I'm your host, Paula Faris, and our favorite Johnny is back just for a hot second.
There's more than one Johnny?
Well, there are many Johnnies, but our favorite Johnny is
That's
back.
Good. That's good.
Yes.
By the way, Paula, is that a onesie t-shirt dress outfit, or is that just white on white? I can't tell from here.
It's white on white. I've got some jorts on, some white shorts, and I've got a white t-shirt on.
It's working.
So,
it's definitely working for you.
Fashion's... Oh, it is? Because usually fashion is like the thing that you make fun of me.
I don't make fun of you. I just point out certain areas where you're very strong, and there's certain areas where you're not so strong. And that fashion sense is one of those not so strong areas. But that's just one of the few areas you don't excel in.
Oh, okay. One area I'm not so strong at is relating to our boys, which is why we had David Thomas on last week talking how we can make sense of our tween and teen boys. And John, you listened to the episode, and we also are going to be answering your questions, not yours, but listener questions coming up in this episode. But I could cry tears of joy and tears of relief after talking with David, because I feel like I understand our maniacs a little bit more.
Well, I think what he did is he didn't just say, we're going to help you relate to boys. He looked at them in different stages. What are they feeling? Right. What are they experiencing? How are they developing? And he made it very systematic in the approach of how a 9 to 12 versus a 12 to 15 versus what somebody should be thinking when they're 18 or even in their early 20s, which I had really never thought about a boy still developing until almost 25 years old.
25, yeah, he said extend the runway. But when and again, we're talking tween and teen boys, which is something that you wanted us to talk about. But that tween phase, that stage 3 boy needs to be connected and outdoors. And stage 4, he needs to be exhausted and employed. But I also took away that there needs to be oversight and supervision with boys, much more so than with girls.
And he gave some really very key insights on what we can be doing with them, how we can be protecting them. He gave some very practical, easy to memorize or remember ways that we can approach working with our young boys.
I thought it was really, really, really helpful. Today, he's going to be answering your questions about gaming and consequences and porn and weed. Like, some of these questions were really intense, but need to be addressed. And he's going to tell you why he's most concerned about screens and substances with our tween and teen boys. So without further ado, David Thomas is back to answer your questions about how we can make sense of tween and teen boys. And he's answering all your questions except for John's about why I'm in a onesie. Here you go. Okay, are you ready to answer some questions? I'm ready. A lot of questions, and some of them are really heavy and hard.
I'm ready. Let's hit as many as we can.
I would love it. Let's start out with gaming, okay? Stephanie says, how do we limit gaming when they say it's how they're talking to their friends? She says she limits gaming all the time, but her son doesn't understand that he's a different person the more he games, and it's all he thinks about. I can testify. My youngest is consumed with it. Yeah. But again, it's how he's connecting. He's talking to his friends. How do we limit it? What are some healthy boundaries around it?
Couple of things I'd say to that. It is all about limiting it. And I want to be very clear in saying I'm fine with boys having some time online with good, healthy limits, connecting with friends, doing some gaming. I have some concerns, obviously, about some of the games that are out there, but I would say in general, I'm okay with it, but I don't want it to be his primary form of connection because research would tell us 70 to 80% of all communication is nonverbal. So I've got to learn to read what a person's saying with their face and their body as much as with their words. And if I'm just wearing a headset connecting with friends, I'm not having any practice with the nonverbal. So he's got to be on sports teams. He's got to be asking girls to dances. He's got to be having these real life experiences. So he's getting that 70 to 80%. I would also say, don't wait on him right now, particularly in early stage 4, to come around to a knowledge of, you know what, I think I've been on too long and my brain's kind of turning to mush. Like, that's why we set the limits for him. That late frontal lobe development means his capacity for self-governing is limited. And so he can't know those things, see those things the same way for himself. So that's why we set limits.
They'll be gaming and forget to go to the bathroom and forget to eat.
Absolutely.
Or I thought I was on for 30 minutes and it's been 3 hours.
Yes.
They have no regulation.
Yes.
When they're gaming.
You're 100% right. And I would challenge any parent to think about what it's felt like. We've all had this experience on a Sunday when your screen time report rolls in from Apple. And you're like, are you kidding me? I was up this week. I thought I was down. Like, we all know what that's like. And we're adults with full frontal lobe development. And so if that's true for us, of course he can. And the setting of the limits, last thing I'd say is I talk a lot about prioritizing health over happiness. And if we're prioritizing happiness, we're just going to let him have unlimited time because that's what he'd love. If we're prioritizing his well-being, then we're going to say, buddy, I'm okay with the fact that you don't get that you need to come off of it. I'm okay with the fact that you don't see that you kind of turn into a different person. I do. And so that's why I'm always going to have limits. But we're not waiting on him to see that for himself right now.
Okay. And the importance of stage 3 and stage 4, being outdoors and being unplugged in stage 3, and then stage 4, which we talked about in our last episode, being employed and being exhausted, getting them involved in sports. Okay, so it cannot be the primary connection.
No.
So prioritizing the well-being over their happiness. That's really great and really helpful. Sarah wants to know, our biggest struggle is a way to work through the tween ragey reactions / direct disobedience that doesn't involve him losing access to electronics every time. She says the iPad and the Xbox seem to be the only bargaining chip, and she hates it. How can we find some other consequences? How do we deal with that direct defiance and disobedience? And what should those consequences be?
I would say the first thing we want to prioritize is regulation. And the mistake we make is that we start with discipline. And what I want to say about that is that discipline is intended to be about teaching. It's not primarily about punishment. And so it's opportunity for kids to make connection, to figure out, okay, I did something wrong and I want to do something different. If my thinking brain is not online, which is always true when I'm dysregulated, I can't make good connections. So we talk about regulate first, talk second. Regulate first, discipline second, but regulate always leads. And it's why when we talked about the 3 R's, it's really why I wrote my newest book, Raising Emotionally Strong Boys, because I want us to be practicing those.
Fabulous read.
You're so kind. I want us to practice recognize and regulate over and over and over. So to this question, I'm going to look at him and say, until you're flooded with emotions right now, what do you need to do to work that through? And I'm not even going to touch the disrespect that may have happened in the exchange when I told him to turn off the gaming device until some point later when I know his thinking brain's online. And I have a blueprint in that book for creating what I call some space and a top 5 list, which is back to that second question of how do I offload or manage stress? So I've got to figure out what are the ways for me to do it. And I'll go ahead and give you 2 quick ones. Movement and breathing, research would tell us, are the 2 most efficient, effective ways for any one of us to get our thinking brain back online, to reset the amygdala, to get from what I call stress to settled or chaos to calm. But the mistake we make in those moments is we start speaking to kids, teaching to kids, disciplining kids when they're in that stress state. They can't make connections till they get to the settled state. So that's why I love leading with some kind of declaration like that. Until you're flooded with emotion, what do you need to do to work that through? And then we wait and do the talking later. Yeah. Okay. And that's what the top 5 list is all about.
When you say have the conversation later, so when emotion is low and cognition is higher, what are we talking, like 30 minutes, an hour later? Just say we're going to talk about it later, but make sure you're following up on that, right?
Absolutely. And for some boys, that might be a couple of hours later. Like I know some boys who are like, I need to go on a 5-mile run. Fantastic. Go do that. And we'll talk when you get back. The other thing that I would say to the last part of her great question is when there is a natural consequence, I want us to chase that. So, for example, if a kid comes home who can drive with alcohol in their breath, a natural consequence is you don't get to drive for a while. When there's not a natural consequence, what we encourage parents to chase second is their currency. And that's different for every kid. There are some kids who are really social, and their currency would be if I take away the birthday party on Saturday or the overnight on Friday night or the ball game. But for other kids, it might be screen time. For other kids, it might be driving or the independence piece. So we're going to start with a natural consequence. When we can't grab that, I think currency's next. But the only other thing I'd say to that is when we grab currency, we want to remember that an adolescent's sense of time is skewed. So 2 minutes feels like 2 hours. 2 hours feels like 2 days. So if I take away something really big, it can incentivize kids to kind of throw in the towel as opposed to, hey, buddy, you lost 30 minutes of gaming time. If you want to keep arguing, that'll go to 45. Okay, now we're up to an hour. So see where we're moving in small increments to match their sense of time.
So don't come out of the gate saying you're grounded, you can't game for the next year.
Correct.
Because I'm then being irrational. Okay, speaking of some consequences, the next couple of questions are going to be consequences phone related. Anne says, what are good consequences for the misuse of phones? It's so hard because parents rely on them for communication with kids, but when the kids misuse them, what do we do? She says, it feels like when we were younger and had the rotary dial phone, life is just easier. And it was.
It was.
Talk to our boyfriends on the 50-foot cord and have to wind it through the kitchen and down the steps to the basement. So what are some good consequences for misuse of phone? Now, you just mentioned their currency and natural consequence, but what would you recommend?
Something I'd say about the phone that I think we can forget is that, to that mom's great question of just, I need him to have it for convenience purposes. And we do. We want to remember that we could still allow kids to have a phone and strip it down to nothing. I had a person at the Genius Bar at the Apple Store one time tell me, you can turn an iPhone into an iPod Touch at any given moment. And that is a great bit of wisdom to go back to. So it's like the things that often matter the most to them are going to be access to social media platforms or music or, we could fill in the blank, the games they have on them. So we can easily, and we may need to go to the Genius Bar to get support in the tech, not in the how do we technically walk this out, but we can turn an iPhone into an iPod Touch pretty easily. And so it may be that he gets to keep his phone for convenience. So I know where to pick him up in the parking lot or on the school campus, but he loses access to a lot of what it will do. So that's one way that we could think about them keeping a phone, but we shift their currency in that space. But I would also say there may come a time where it does make sense that they lose the device altogether and go back to, I've had some kids who lost their phone altogether and their parents even went back. They lost driving privileges and a phone, and they had to go back to what it felt like in 7th grade when my mom and dad dropped me off, which can be a hard hit in terms of a consequence if you've tasted the freedom of driving.
Right. And on the other side of that, the parent has tasted the freedom of the convenience of having your kid drive. I told my daughter, I was like, look, she already has a ticket. And we talked about this in our episode. She got a ticket when she was 15 and a half because you can drive at 15 and a half in South Carolina. I said, one more ticket, you can't drive. You'll have too many points on your license. And I said, from a convenience standpoint, I don't want that to happen because I don't want to have to drop you off at school anymore and pick you up from track practice and take you to volleyball practice. So I was like, this is not me trying to give you a lecture. I'm just saying, follow the speed limit. Okay? Follow the speed limit, please, because it's going to be real inconvenient for both of us if that happens. Another question about phones, and this is also from Anne. This is one of my good friends, by the way. She has 3 boys. She says, how do we talk about boundaries with phones? Because they're created to be addictive, especially that 12 to 14, 12 to 15, these social media companies and platforms pour so much money because they know that these kids finally have access to their parents' credit cards. So how do you talk to your kids about boundaries around cell phones? And same with iPads with the younger ones. She says it's just hard because their peers often will have 0 limits. And of course, she's called the meanest mother in the whole world because she has limits. So how can we constructively have a conversation about boundaries?
Well, I want to first say, Anne, if you have 3 boys, you're heroic in my book. You're amazing.
She's amazing.
I believe it.
And she's a teacher. She's fantastic.
I believe it.
Love her.
I would also say to her great question that we are huge advocates of contracts when it comes to technology. And I want to encourage parents in this, even if you've already given a device, you can go back. You make me the bad guy. Hey, I listened to this guy on a podcast today and he recommended we do a contract and I wish we had, and we're going to go back and do that. And I'm talking about just a 1-pager. And there are a lot of great sample contracts online. We could cut and paste what we like and don't like, but it's going to spell out the terms in really simple, concrete language, what responsible use looks like. good boundaries. And then it's going to spell out what the consequences are if I violate those terms. And I like the idea of having kids sign that. And I think it serves two great purposes. One, it makes it really clear. And I would also add to that, boys are primarily visual creatures. So when we're talking about all the terms, he can get lost. But when he can see it, he makes better connections. Secondly, I think it trains kids for how the world works. I mean, think about it. I have a contract with the bank for my mortgage. I have a contract with Daystar for my employment. I have a contract with AT&T for my phone. Like, if I follow the terms, I get to keep those things as they are. If I don't, Absolutely. I'm going to lose it. And so I think it prepares kids for how all of life works and allows us to spell out the terms to create those good boundaries. And last thing I'd say to Anne and really every parent listening is that I think in this day and age, if we don't hear kids say from time to time, you're the strictest parent or you're the only parent who does this, we're probably not doing our job. And so I want parents to even see that as encouragement. And I would meet kids in that space of saying, you know what, my guess is you do have a lot of friends around you whose parents don't set limits in this way. And they're responsible for their kids and I'm responsible for mine. Yes, and I'm okay with the fact that that seems unfair. I think that's part of that staying steady we talked about earlier, we talk so much about how boundaries create security for kids. They help them feel safe. And so I want them to experience the safety of boundaries even when it frustrates them.
That's so good. I'm going to find a good contract. Maybe you can send me one that you like, and I'll put the link in the show notes because that's something very tangible right away. And I like the idea of getting them to sign it, and it does prepare them for the real world.
Yes.
Okay, this is a fascinating question. It's from Jennifer, and she says, body image is so hard. Boys are brutal to each other over their size. I have a daughter and never dreamed that it would be worse for my son. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. He's a bit of a late bloomer, a little husky. By no means is he fat, but he is called fat every day by other boys who think it's funny and they're just teasing him. It's so hard on him. And one of his friends is super skinny and they say that he looks like an AIDS patient. I'm sorry, I'm just reading this question. And then she says it's also hard to hear and hard on the self-esteem. I hear this from boy moms all the time and it isn't just my son's school. How do I help him keep his self-esteem intact with all the constant teasing?
Yeah. Well, I'm grieved with this mom to hear this question and to think about the number of families I've consulted with over the years who would say something really similar. Like, I imagine this to be a hard journey for my daughter. I never dreamed this kind of conversation would be going on with boys. And, we could have a whole conversation about what I think boys are bumping up against in the world, in social media, in entertainment, with athletes in terms of what's communicated to them about their bodies. And so I do think there is a vehicle for developing more critical thinking always. I want us to be having those kind of conversations with kids. When we look at pictures in magazines, when we look at images online, like, I love asking boys the question, like, what do you think they're selling? What do you think they're saying? Helping them develop some discernment and critical thinking around what's that saying to me about the body. And I would, in addition to that, to the relational piece, say in my newest book on page 107 and page 117, for anybody who has a copy of Raising Emotionally Strong Boys, I have some questions to ask boys about their friendships that I think are really good questions to dive into with boys. Again, back to your wisdom, Paula, in the right moment, we want to talk in the right moment, that help him make some connections around who are the loyal people, kind of back to that, who are the people who support me, so that they start to separate out some of these other voices as those aren't my people. Now, I'm not saying pretend like it's not happening, and it may reach a point where we need to start by brainstorming with him what it looks like to use his voice in those moments and what it may look like to use his voice to engage other adults, to pull them into building some awareness, because I don't want that amazing kid to just feel like my only good option is just to sit with this and get bombarded with these kind of jabs along the way. And so we want to start with empowering him to use his voice to speak back. And then if that's not enough, we're going to pull some adults into the equation.
That's really, really good. And it's something that a lot of boys are struggling with. We don't hear this very much because maybe they're ashamed to talk about it. But really fascinating. We talked about this in part one. We just kind of touched the surface on some of these heavier and harder topics: pot, drugs, drinking, and porn. Beth says, what does pot do to the undeveloped male brain? Drugs/drinking with legal pot, and what are the long-term effects of both? And there's so much peer pressure. So many of the boys are doing drugs. or they're doing pot. No, it's fine.
Yes.
But what are some of those long-term ramifications of pot on the undeveloped male brain?
I have two significant concerns in that space. And I'll begin by saying, Paula, I am the most concerned when it comes to boys. If you were just asking me, David, what are the two things that scare you the most when you think about adolescent males? I would say screens and substances. Those are the two things I'm the most concerned about. And ironically, both for the same reason. Because back to our conversation a little bit earlier, those are tools for numbing, and boys are already skilled in what I call suppression. We're working toward expression when I think boys are so good at suppression and self-reliance. How do I talk more about what's going on? How do I reach out for help? And I think screens and substances are two tools for a lot of numbing, none of the navigating that we talked about earlier.
Yes. Navigate, not.
Yes. And
the goal is to navigate.
It is. And they're just convenient tools for that.
Okay. So we're going to role play. Your twin boys come to you when they're 17 and they say, we're doing pot. It's legal. It's fine. There's no long-term effects. It helps calm me down.
Tell me where you came by that data. I'm going to automatically hit them with that. Like, tell me where you came by that. Yeah, my buddies were talking about it. Okay, that's good to know. So if 17-year-old guys are your primary source for information, we already got a problem right there. I had a mom say to me recently, her teenage son said that, and he said, buddy, taking advice on substances from 17-year-old boys would be the equivalent of me taking parent advice from the Kardashians. Like, that's not their area of expertise. Okay. They might have some good thoughts on lip gloss, but you're like, I got to go to the right sources. So yeah. And then maybe using, hey, I want to share something with you. I read this is actually confirmed data. What do you think about that? So I'm not just going to beat them over the head with this data, but I'm going to ask some questions. What are your thoughts on that? Where does that line up with what you've heard? Where does it not line up with what you've heard? You know, Paula, let's laugh together. I don't just tell people not to do this. I do it myself. I went to my doctor not long ago and I said, okay, I did that thing that everyone knows not to do. I Googled some of my symptoms. And he's like, David, you write books about this. You know, it's like, exactly. It's like, how could we train kids in that direction of don't go to the wrong sources for information, go to the right sources. If I have some concerns about my body, I need to camp out in front of my doctor. That's where I don't need to be Googling symptoms online.
Sure. Yeah. Because it's always going to be much worse. And
yes.
You're going to have 6 months to live if you Google
there
symptoms.
It is.
Absolutely.
There it is.
Okay. A couple of more questions. You talk a lot about, instead of numbing, helping them navigate, right? Helping them to walk through some of these tough conversations. And Lenore says, the pre-puberty boys, how do you engage in difficult topics like the dangers of social media, sexual behavior, mental health that only knew an online social media world? Like this is their new world. So yes. How do you navigate maybe for that stage 3, as we talked about in part 1 of this episode, which is more that 9 to 12 pre-adolescent stage where they need to be outdoors, they need to be unplugged, but they are discovering their sexuality. How do you handle their moods and engage in some of these difficult topics?
I think we begin by establishing ourselves as the source. Like we want to be saying to our boys all along development from really early, like, hey, I'm your person. If you hear something at school and you wonder about that, you come to me. You can ask me anything. You can say anything. So there's this freedom and they experience, not just hear, but experience, I'm safe. Now, I want to challenge parents in this moment. Let's laugh together. When we get some of the hard-hitting questions, I really want to challenge you. Watch your face and your body. So he comes at it, hey, I heard this today. Who told you that? Like, got to pay attention to our tone. You know, it's like, okay, wow, right. That's a great question. Of course you'd wonder about that. I want to challenge parents to be thinking about beginning with some kind of statement that communicates support and also establishes ourselves as the source. If you're saying you can ask me anything, but then I freak out when you do, there's not a lot of safety in that support. And so how could I communicate with my words, with my tone, Brilliant. All of it being safe? And then I also recommend in Wild Things, I talk about some of my favorite resources, books to read with boys, questions to ask boys, so that we are not just establishing ourselves, but leading them, guiding them in the information they're needing so they aren't vulnerable to Googling all the things they wonder about, because they will wonder. They're curious creatures.
They really are curious. 2 more questions. One is about porn. So like I said, some of these are really heavy topics. The other one's about sports. How much is too much? And you say specifically for that stage 4 boy, the age 13 to 17, you want him employed and exhausted. You want him in sports, right?
I do.
Because of the biological chaos. But how much is too much? And this is where my husband and I kind of have a bit of a disconnect. My daughter is so active in sports, volleyball, track and field. She's always got something every single night after school. I think it's good for her because girls, again, the drama, the emotion, the anxiety, it's good for her. It's a physiological release. I encourage it for girls. They should be. I think all kids should play sports.
Yes.
My husband coaches high school basketball, and coaches youth basketball. You might not find a bigger fan of youth sports, but I feel like it's a little too much. And I don't know, what is a healthy boundary? Where do we draw the line? Especially when parents like John and I really don't see eye to eye on this.
Yeah. It's a great question. And it's a hard question to wrestle down because we're living at a moment in time in history where we have hijacked youth sports and turned it into something it really wasn't designed to be. Like, it was designed to be a context for kids to move their bodies, a context for kids to build relationships and develop socially. And we have turned it into this hyper competitive experience. And, when I was growing up, most of the kids I knew played 3 to 4 sports a year. Now it's like you got to pick one by the time you get to high school, and it could consume 10 to 12 months of your year. And it just wasn't designed to be that. Absolutely. And
right. It's travel.
I would challenge parents, pay attention to the pace and the league. And so, I've known kids who were playing on a high level of travel sports and decided, no, I'm done. I'm just doing school sports or rec sports. I'm going to dial down the league and the pace in a way that allows me to have that experience. I've got some high school guys who wanted to work more in the summer to earn money and couldn't because of the sports requirements in that point, and decided, you know what? I'm going to do church league basketball, and got a group of guys together. They're hysterical. They dress in these old school uniforms. They ordered them online, like tube socks, headbands. They're hilarious. One of the guys wears a full suit, and he's the coach. He carries a clipboard. Like, I hope these guys I hope it goes viral. It's so fun. But it's this sense of we're playing for fun. We're out there together. We're kind of taking back what it was designed to be. So those would be some places where I would challenge parents, because we do want him to have a movement-based experience. He needs that, back to what we talked about, what's going on in stage 3 and stage 4, the biological tsunami, the release piece. But too much of any good thing can simply be too much.
Right. And I love sports because, yes, it keeps them active and keeps them out of trouble. But I think that's where they learn some of the greatest life lessons, that life's not just about you. You have to learn how to fail and fail forward. You have to learn how to be a good teammate. You have to learn how to serve your teammates. You have to learn how to be resilient, be a team player. Like, all those things are, I think, some better lessons than you might learn in the academic space. So that's why I'm a huge proponent of it, but definitely a larger conversation. So pace and league. And then the final question, porn is a big thing that we don't really know. Like you said, that our first introduction is that pre-adolescent.
Yes.
So that's my son. That's my youngest, which terrifies me. It is a real issue. And I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that teen pregnancy rates are down because kids aren't having as much sex, because the boys are so addicted to pornography that they don't need that intimacy in their relationships. Porn is become an epidemic with our young men. So I don't even know if we can do it justice in this question and this answer, but like, how big of an issue is it? And how do we navigate this with our boys?
I would say first and foremost, let's go back to numbing versus navigating and thinking about what it's accomplishing. I would even add to that, I talk so much in all my work about the importance of boys experiencing healthy risk. And Paul, I'm greatly concerned that that's happening less than ever. In fact, I'm seeing fewer boys who are continuing with an athletic experience. They're wanting to drop off playing sports because I think they want to stay home and play games. I'm seeing fewer boys than ever who are interested in getting their driver's permit or license. When I was growing up, I didn't know a single person who wasn't chomping at the bit. And to think about it, that involves healthy risk. I'm seeing fewer boys than ever wanting to ask a girl to a dance because that involves risk. Fine to just stay home with a headset on, talk to my friends. The stats are even down on boys who are applying to college. And that's not to say college is the end all be all for every boy, but I'm deeply concerned about the trend in that space because it's risky to apply to college. I might not get in. I might not get enough money. I might have to work more. Like, all the possibilities where I'm seeing boys avoid healthy risk. And I think pornography is one of those places. It's like, I don't have to do the risk of real relationship. I can just experience false intimacy. And so I think we need to pay attention to that. I think we also want to go back to our part of the conversation of, are we answering enough of a boy's question that he's not asking the normal questions around the normal curiosity in the right places? And we've established ourselves as a source. Therefore, he feels like I need to Google those things. And that's how I'm finding my way to pornography. And lastly, I'd say I have a section in Wild Things where I actually talk just about pornography. And I always want us to be addressing how pornography impacts the brain, how it reshapes our understanding of intimacy and pleasure, how it impacts relationships. It distorts my experience of what male-female relationships should look like. And it also impacts the world. And that's a piece we don't talk about as much. So even boys who've found sites that offer some free content can start to think, okay, I'm not harming anyone because I didn't pay for anything. And the reality is, even the free content required someone to be trafficked in a way that content was created to, yes, you are contributing to that larger societal problem. So I think talking about it on all three of those ways is something we've got to do with the boys we love as well.
And how do we even start that conversation? And the oversight, the supervision, should we be monitoring their phones even more so? Like, I don't even know where to begin. And I honestly haven't even thought about this that much. And again, my boys are 14 and 10, so they're in that space where they've been exposed or are probably being exposed. And I don't even know. I kind of have left it to my husband, but he doesn't know. Like growing up, they had Victoria's Secret magazines coming to the house, and that was like the extent of that. But everything is accessible. Everything's at their fingertips. Yes. I don't know where to start. I don't even know where to start with this conversation.
Well, I think it starts with anytime kids get access to a screen of any kind, I do think there's wisdom in us saying with consistency, hey, there is great information out there in the world. And there's some really scary stuff too. My job as a parent is to make sure you have access to the good stuff, the good information, and are safeguarded with the scary stuff. And we're going to do that in different ways all throughout your growing up. And that's where I love organizations like Bark Technology and Teen Safe.
Bark is great.
Absolutely. And those folks have helped us as parents figure out how do we safeguard the devices. And the thing I love in particular about Bark is they're not just limiting access, but what Bark does is every time they figure out kids have searched in a certain space, they're going to send parents an email. So our accounts are linked to it and say, hey, here was something that happened. Have conversation in this way about pornography. And they're going to send a link to some great articles and different ways to engage kids. So I love recommending tools like that I think make our job as parents easier.
Yeah, instead of just, hey, here's the problem, it actually gives you some hope and a solution to move forward and some practical, tactical advice. David, this has been fabulous. Can I just look up I don't know if you can see, I have made so many notes on every single page.
Paula.
I will go back and listen to this conversation no fewer than 10 times. And things make sense. My boy who doesn't make sense to me kind of makes sense now. And I'm so grateful to you for the work that you're doing.
Incredibly kind. I'm so grateful we had to spend this time together. I'm such a fan of yours. I hope you know that. Sissy and I talk about it all the time and how grateful we are that our lives intersected and the joy of getting to spend time with you this morning. Thank you for this.
Next time I'm in Nashville,
please.
We're going to get together.
Yes, we are. We've already picked out where we're taking you out to eat. So please let us know when it's happening. Okay?
Oh, really? I'm a meat and potatoes girl. All right.
We'll
I'm
make
a good
it happen.
Midwestern girl. So, thank you, David.
Great to be with you.
Another great conversation with David Thomas and great questions from all of you. And we will link to a lot of those helpful resources that he mentioned. We even found a really helpful phone contract that we are having our kids sign, even though they already have phones. So don't feel like all hope is lost. We found a contract that we will be linking in the show notes. It's actually from an organization called Wait Till 8th, and we've had the founder of Wait Till 8th on the podcast. So John, what'd you think about that Q&A with David? What'd you learn?
First of all, great questions from our viewers. So it was very engaging, and just the way he approaches each and every aspect of it. One of the things that he said that maybe was somewhat convicting to me, but really helped me understand, and I think it helped you understand, boys and even men, we tend to want to numb feelings. We tend to want to numb things that aren't going well in our life. And screens and substances are one of those, or two of those things that are very easy to do. We don't have to, we don't have to address the issue. We don't have to address the problem. We just are looking for different outlets to suppress it. And that's one of the worst things you can do.
Yeah, and he's concerned that our boys aren't taking enough healthy risk. And he really helped, especially having a response when our boys are like, we want a game, we're talking with our friends, giving you a healthy response to that, okay, it's okay to connect, but we need the majority of your connection to be in, person to person, so you can see expressions.
Nonverbal cues were what he was really talking about. And that gets lost when you're texting people or you're on the phone with them. That face-to-face contact is really important.
And I can be a bit of a hothead. He said, help.
No, not
I know.
you.
A little bit. It's that Lebanese feistiness that all of the Lebanese Faris women have. But helping the boys regulate first. I can be very quick to say, you know what, I'm taking this away for a month. But he says regulate, and then you can come back to it. And you can say to your boys, I can tell that you're flooded with emotions right now. What do you need to work that through? That was super helpful to me. I can tell, buddy, you're flooded with emotions. What do you need to work that through?
And their
so it gives you both a we.
Yeah, and the relationship to time. Because a few hours feels like a lot longer to them than it may feel like to us. And so just trying to speak to them and understand that it's not the end of the world if you lose privileges to something for a few hours or a few days.
And you weren't part of that conversation with David, but I'm so glad that you were able to kind of give your take on it. Next week, you and I are going to have a conversation how to have an equitable partnership, how we are equal partners. We have stepped up in different seasons.
Is that possible?
What? Stepping up or equal?
Both. No.
No, I think it's a really important conversation. Everything that happened with Harrison Butker and that whole controversy. And, I waded into those waters and whatever. I said what I had to say. It's my opinion. Okay. But I have spoken about you, and I wrote about you in my book, that my story of spousal equity is a rarity. And I want people to hear from you and I who have worked through this, but also you're kind of an anomaly, John. You put your career on the back burner for a bit so I could pursue mine. And that's not a very common thing. So I want to give you props, but I want to talk about how we have navigated the good and the bad, the highs and the lows, and how we have become really great partners. And we are raising our kids together. It's not on me. It's not on you. We're doing this together. So it's going to be a great conversation coming up next week. I'm sure some people will take offense to it, but whatever. It's our story, and we hope to encourage you through it.
Looking forward to it.
Are you really, though?
I don't have a choice.
And scene. All right, y'all. Thanks for joining us, and we can't wait to see you next week as we continue to talk about it. But as John said, he doesn't have a choice. So he's here whether he wants to be or not. I love you, John.
Love you too.
Okay. See you soon, guys.
Bye.
I know you guys thought you were done with me, but not quite yet. I have one more thing to tell you about. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe to the show. I don't want you to miss a single beat or a single conversation. And remember, my DMs are always open. Tell me what you want to talk about.